Good morning. It is me, Benjamin Franklin. We are going to get underway with Chapter 8. On a Friday we talked about the census of 1790. Unfortunately, I would not have made the census as that was the year I died. So after today, no more Benjamin Franklin.
1783, the year that marked the end of the American Revolution. Most Americans earn their living by farming. Before the Revolution, the American colonies had been part of the vast British Empire, and American farmers sold their goods in markets worldwide. Shortly after the Revolution, in 1790, the first U.S. Census revealed that almost 97% of the population of 4 million still lived in rural areas. Meanwhile, the country was growing steadily and immigration from Europe was increasing. Americans were moving westward, New Englanders and Pennsylvanians into Ohio, Virginians and Carolinians into Kentucky and Tennessee. Good farms were to be had for small sums. Labor was in strong demand. The rich valley stretches of upper New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia soon became great wheat-growing areas. Although many items were still homemade, the Industrial Revolution was dawning in the United States. Massachusetts and Rhode Island were laying the foundation of important textile industries. Connecticut was beginning to turn out tinware and clocks. New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania were producing paper, glass, and iron. Shipping had grown to such an extent that on the seas the United States was second only to Britain. Even before 1790, American ships were traveling to China to sell furs and bring back tea, spices, and silk. The United States began incurring debt even before it became a nation, as colonial leaders borrowed money from France and the Netherlands to win their independence from Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. The Continental Congress, forerunner to the U.S. Congress, did not have the power to tax citizens, and the debt continued to grow. By 1790, it had topped $75 million, with a 30% debt-to-GDP ratio, according to an accounting presented that year by Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. Judiciary Act of 1789, officially titled an Act to establish the Judicial Courts of the United States, was signed into law by President George Washington on September 24, 1789. Article 3 of the Constitution established a Supreme Court, but left to Congress the authority to create lower federal courts as needed. Principally authored by Senator Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut, the Judiciary Act of 1789 established the structure and jurisdiction of the federal court system and created the position of Attorney General. In 1789, the first presidential election, George Washington was unanimously elected President of the United States. With 69 electoral votes, Washington won the support of each participating elector. No other president since has come into office with a universal mandate to lead. Between December 15, 1788 and January 10, 1789, the presidential electors were chosen in each of the states. On February 4, 1789, the Electoral College convened.
George Washington is often called the father of our country. There are many legends surrounding his life. He had false teeth made of wood. He skipped a silver dollar across the Potomac River. He confessed to chopping down a cherry tree. While none of these stories about Washington are actually true, the real story of his life is still extraordinary. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. At the time, Virginia was a colony of Great Britain. As a young boy, George learned to farm tobacco and raise livestock. He attended school and learned math and geography. At age 16, he was hired to help survey the lands of George William in Northern Virginia. Surveying is when someone uses math to determine the location of points and boundaries. Surveyors make maps. As the colony continued to grow, Washington's skills were in great demand. At age 20, George Washington inherited Mount Vernon, his family's plantation located along the Potomac River in Virginia. Over the next 47 years, Washington grew the plantation to over 8,000 acres, expanded the mansion, and added buildings. Washington also owned hundreds of enslaved workers who raised crops, cooked, and cleaned at Mount Vernon. Washington also served in the military. At age 20, Washington joined the Virginia militia. Tensions between the British and French were bringing the two countries close to war. When the French and Indian War started in 1754, Washington was promoted to colonel and led British troops against the French and their Native American allies in several battles. At the Battle of Monongahela, Washington helped save British forces while having 2 horses shot out from under him and 4 bullets cut through his coat. Stories of his bravery and courage made him a hero both in the colonies and back in Britain. Though the war was still going on, Washington resigned from the militia as a general in 1758. In January 1759, he married Martha Custis and returned to Mount Vernon and a life of farming. He also served in the Virginia legislature, called the House of Burgesses. During his 15 years as a Burgess, Washington grew increasingly frustrated with British taxes and restrictions. In May of 1775, Washington served as a delegate for Virginia at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The next month, Congress elected Washington to serve as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This army would represent the people of the colonies and fight against the British government. The American Revolutionary War lasted 8 years, from April of 1775 until 1783. During that time, Washington led the army through the brutal winters at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and Morristown, New Jersey. He led a daring surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. He kept the army together after defeats in New York and outside Philadelphia. Washington's army of about 20,000 often suffered from lack of food, clothing, and money. But Washington's own bravery and personal sacrifice motivated many soldiers to fight on. After gaining French support in 1778, the Continental Army worked to defeat the remaining British forces. In October of 1781, Washington's army, along with French forces, surrounded the British at Yorktown, Virginia. The British surrendered. After the Revolutionary War, Washington resigned from the military and returned to overseeing his farms at Mount Vernon. As a new country, the United States had many problems to deal with. The government at that time, called the Articles of Confederation, was too weak. It could not collect taxes or print money to pay off the costs of the Revolutionary War. In the summer of 1786, a rebellion over taxes started in Massachusetts. The rebellion was defeated in early 1787, but it highlighted the country's problems. Leaders from across the country, including George Washington, decided to meet in Philadelphia that summer to address the country's problems. The delegates elected Washington as the president of the convention. Over the next few months, they wrote a new constitution to replace the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation created a weak central government with only one branch, a legislative branch. The new Constitution established 3 branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The executive branch is headed by the president. In 1788, America elected George Washington as our first president. During his 8 years in office, Washington established many examples or precedents for future presidents to follow. He refused to take any fancy titles and asked to be called Mr. President. He served only 2 terms in office. He tried to stay neutral in foreign wars. Washington also put down a rebellion called the Whiskey Rebellion and favored the creation of a national bank. Washington was the only president to never belong to a political party. In 1796, as Washington prepared to leave the office of the president, he wrote a farewell address outlining his vision for the country. In it, he encouraged neutrality in foreign wars and warned against the development of political parties. He also stressed the importance of staying united as a nation. Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. Washington finally retired from public service in 1797, returning to Mount Vernon and his wife, Martha. He spent the next 2 years managing his estate until December 14, 1799, when he died suddenly from a cold. He was 67 years old. Today, there are over 125 places in the U.S. named after George Washington. His image is on the quarter, the $1 bill, and Mount Rushmore. The capital of the U.S. bears his name. Washington is considered a model for all the presidents that followed him. He was a famous military leader, but he worked hard to keep his country out of wars. He was so popular that some Americans wanted to make him king, but he stepped away from office after 8 years. He tried to keep the country united across geographic divisions and political parties. His example and his leadership earned him the reputation as the father of the country.